Okay, this is a book review. Here's the book, How Christianity Changed the World. Reasonably thick book. The guy is a professor, Alvin Schmidt, professor of sociology, but he also wrote a bunch of books about religious history. It's a pretty good book. It's from 2001. It's got some decent illustrations and pictures, and a lot of the stuff, I know you heard me talk about it before. Basically, most of what we consider good in the modern world came from the Catholic Church. It's just a fact. Okay, Christianity kept the knowledge of the ancient Greeks and Romans alive. We know that. It kept the Bible alive. The monasteries were the initial apprenticeship, became the initial sort of universities. The cathedral schools became really the big university system in Latin language, so professors could move all around Europe. Christendom is run by the Pope. Students had a lot of rights, a lot more rights than they would have elsewhere. And they educated a lot of poor people, too. It wasn't just for rich people. The idea of a comeback is built into Christianity with the idea of the resurrection, of redeeming oneself, for example. I like the quote by Jordan Peterson, even though he's not a real Christian. I think he's full of BS. He did say, what happened to Jesus was the greatest tragedy in the history of mankind. He was the best person, we got treated the worst. Yeah, so I think that's a pretty good quote. 11 out of 12 apostles were martyred, except for John the Apostle. You know, he had to take care of Mary and write the book of Revelation. But the point is, you don't see 11 out of 12 guys volunteering to be martyred unless they really believe that Jesus was God. Okay, that would not have happened. That's not a disputed thing. Men do not die for made-up stories. I have come that they may have life. I like that quote from John 10:10 because Christianity is all about life. You know, go forth and be fruitful and multiply. It celebrates the Holy Family. It celebrates family and marriage for life, and it's all about life and preserving life. Jesus went around healing people. Okay, the reason I say that is the modern world is being taken over by a philosophy one would call atheistic Darwinism, and it's all about hatred and death. It wants reduction in the number of people in the population. It wants more abortions. It wants more infanticide. It wants more euthanasia. It has a program, MAID, medical assistance in dying. It wants teenagers and older people to commit suicide, to euthanize themselves. Its basic attitude is the world's overpopulated, we need to reduce people. Christianity says all men are created in the image of God. Therefore, we're all part divine. Therefore, the individual, whoever he might be, is deserving of natural rights, of privacy, respect, should not be abused, etc. Atheistic Darwinism says there's no such thing as a human. There's just a continuation with the monkeys, the apes. A human is just a primate that talks, has no intrinsic rights, not entitled to anything. There's nothing special about them. So it's like, Voltaire and the debate, Will Durant, he said basically, the philosopher doesn't care about whether God exists or not, but for the average man, without having the Christian faith, life's pretty miserable for them. They're told that you're just a talking monkey with no rights. That's not very encouraging. Modern atheistic Darwinism has no moral foundation. It aggressively promotes abortions, and it murders all these babies. It gets all these feminist women to celebrate murdering their babies. It's like something sick. Could you imagine if you studied some ancient culture and the women are all, jumping around celebrating murdering their babies? You say these people are sick in the head, okay? They celebrate destroying families, screwing over their husbands in divorce. They're sick in the head. Feminism comes from Satanism. That's well known. If you look it up, you'll find out that is true. The whole Wollstonecraft thing. Let's see. And modern atheistic Darwinism celebrates, getting rid of babies. And then what it does is it takes them and sends them to chop shops. And part of what they do is they take these babies and they make them into medications. And then people eat those medicines. That's cannibalism. That's industrial cannibalism, okay? And that's what you get with atheistic Darwinism. It's evil. It's sick. People think Darwinism is like this great science. Darwinism cannot explain origin of life. It cannot explain macroevolution. It's good for microevolution. Why do you have so many different types of dogs or cats? But it doesn't go much beyond that. I mean, it's a general way to structure thought, and that's useful. Sure it is. But it cannot explain macroevolution, origin of complexity, Cambrian expansion, origin of life, etc. The fine-tuning arguments. It can't explain any of that stuff. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. And Christianity got rid of a lot of these cruelty things, like the gladiators, thumbs down, being sentenced to death. Gladiators would die, as Edith Hamilton had said. The Greeks played with their Olympics, but the Roman gladiator contests were not played. The gladiators died, okay? Here's an even better painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme, 1872, thumbs down, okay? And they're very brutal. When you study the history of the Romans, if you haven't studied them before, what you'll be shocked by their brutality. There was a slave revolt, okay? And then Crassus, this rich guy, put down the slave revolt, and every couple hundred yards he just crucified another slave. That's like typical Roman brutality, okay? What's his name? Julius Caesar, when a city of the Gauls rebelled against them, he just chopped off all their hands and he sent them back to show the people, this is what happens to anybody who rebels against Julius Caesar. Okay, the Romans did one thing after another like that. Tom Holland, the historian, used to love the Greeks and Romans when he was a young guy, but the older he got, he realized, especially the Romans, they're just so brutal. It was evil. You know, Nero would put the Christians, tie them to a tree post, and then burn them at night as torches. All of this stuff was typical of the ancient Romans. They're very collectivist, sort of very Eastern in comparison with the Greeks. Greeks are much better than the Romans. The Romans are sort of brutal barbarians in comparison with the ancient Greeks. Here's Christ with the woman taken in adultery. The relevance of this picture is women had it much worse with the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans than they did with Christianity. You know, the ancient Greeks and Romans, they weren't even allowed in the room when the men were talking. You know, they're just basically little servants. They're not allowed to speak, and they're not really supposed to be to show their face in public. They were very much a backdoor. They're not allowed sort of in public. Women had it much worse. And then in ancient Rome, the husband could just dump his wife, get a new younger model, and he didn't have any obligation to her. Christianity's like marriages for life, and women should be treated much better. So women really wanted me. Like over 60% of the early Christians were women because they got treated way better with Christianity than they did in the pagan cultures. Here's showing the wedding registrar, the lady, a painting by Edmund Blair Leighton, great painting. And the women just had it much better. Women don't even know how good they've had it in Western civilization. And like a bunch of chumps, they fell for this feminism business. Women used to be home with the bills paid, and they don't have to work, just take care of their kids. Okay, what a great deal that would be. Nowadays, they go to these crappy jobs, which are fun in their 20s, and then they hate them after they're 30 years of age. And they could be fired in 2 seconds, and they have tiny little families, 1.5 kids, and they're exhausted and they're not happy. The women of the mamas that I knew in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s were much happier than the ones I see nowadays. The ones nowadays are overworked. Christianity built the first orphanages, the first hospitals. They had little military, miniature, semi-hospitals during wars and stuff in ancient Greece and Rome, but the real idea of a hospital, a charitable place year-round that the poor are allowed to go to, that was a Christian thing. Here's a Christian idea of Amsterdam. They had all these like homeless shelters, Mary Magdalene shelters for prostitutes, places to feed people. Christianity did all kinds of nice things. And you got to remember, in the ancient world, there was pretty much barbarians and Christians, okay, and that's about it. And a lot, all this multiculturalism is a bunch of nonsense, okay? The non-Christian cultures were backward compared to the Christians. Just take a look at them. Don't take my word at it. I'll show you some pictures. You could decide for yourself. Here's St. Elizabeth of Hungary, a lay member of the Franciscans, and she made charities to feed the poor. She's the daughter of a king, but she devoted a great deal of her life to helping the poor. Here's one of these like homeless shelters in England, a painting by Gustave Doré. And the leader of the house is walking around reading the Bible, okay? A lot of these things, again, they come from a Christian background. Here, for example, everybody's heard of the YMCA, but what does it mean? It means Young Man's Christian Association, okay, for Christian men. There's tons of these sort of like Christian like charity organizations. Here's Florence Nightingale. Not only did Christianity make the first what we would consider real hospitals, they did a lot to improve nursing. She did a lot of good things. She was tracking outcomes to try to get better outcomes, improve ventilation, get people outside, prevent overcrowding, improve sanitation, hand washing, and she had a big increase in survival rates. And she had lots of nuns helping her, Catholic nuns, take care of the patients. She started the first nursing school in London, 1860. Okay, here's Albert the Great, Magnus. He was the mentor for St. Thomas Aquinas, okay, and he was a polymath genius of his time. And then Thomas Aquinas, the great doctor of theology who wrote Summa Theologica, the unifier of faith and reason, who baptized Aristotle to make him acceptable to the church, who told people to come down out of the heavens and study life on earth, to study nature, was to glorify God, because it's God's creation. It's a rational universe created by a rational God. Therefore, we can understand it. We can follow his thoughts after him. And this really got the scientific movement going, okay? Because Thomas Aquinas said it is, we do glory to God and we show respect for God by studying his creation, his nature, okay? All of these concepts, stop thinking about the afterlife. Think about life here on earth and study nature like biologist Aristotle. Dramatically increased interest in science and so-called natural philosophy is what it was called at that time. And the scholasticism movement led to the Renaissance. There was only a Renaissance in Europe. There's no Renaissance in these other countries. Multiculturalism is nonsense. Here's Abelard and Eloise. He was the great Aristotelian scholar. Okay, and then he fell in love with one of his students. Big love scandal in those days. He was the rock star of scholars in his day. Johann Sebastian Bach, every work is to the glory of God. And what I'm trying to say is music came out of the Catholic Church, from the monophonic chants to the polyphony to the learning how to write musical notation to all the different song forms we take for granted now, the cantata, the symphony, all this stuff, oratorios and stuff. And there's tons of great ones from Bach. And look how many of them are German, okay, and Austrian. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Handel, okay, and a bunch of other ones too. First hospitals from the Catholic Church, and here is the wards of St. John's Hospital by Jan Bierblock, 1778. And then, of course, the Protestants made hospitals too. Because the bottom line is, the Catholic Church got people to care about the poor. No one gave a rat's tail about the poor in ancient Greece or ancient Rome or these other cultures. These other cultures, they were still having cannibalism, for over 1,000, 1,500 years or more. Okay. Catholic Church got rid of all this insanity, human sacrifice and stuff. Here's a painting in Brazil in the 1600s. Cannibalism, okay? Look what she's carrying in her hands. Insane, okay? That's how backward these places were. Here's the Fiji Islands, cannibalism, fairly common in the Fiji Island, for over 2,500 years, all right? And the Fiji Island people thought that if you consume a person, you consume their knowledge. Okay, I mean, that's insane. What I'm trying to say is, in Europe, the Christians were making Gothic cathedrals. 35 craters on the moon are named after Jesuit priests, and all these other cultures, they're backward ass in comparison, with continuing with cannibalism. The Indians up to 1900 were living in American Indians were living in teepees. Okay. The European Christians had made Gothic cathedrals back in 1100 AD, okay? That's, 800 years. They're literally like thousands of years culturally, scientifically ahead of these people. And here's one other painting of American Indians living in teepees, okay? So this multiculturalism is nonsense, okay? And slavery still continues in the modern world, okay? Most of the world still has slavery, and people are being sold as slaves every day. This is just an ongoing fact. So that's why this idea that, America is so racist with all the slavery. BS. Everybody wants to come to America, and everybody living here doesn't want to leave. Hardly anybody wants to leave. And America stinks now compared to how it used to be. America was at its apex, in my opinion, back in the 1980s. Man, the 1980s was such a fun decade. Everything was good back in that age. In terms of the movies, the music, it was great. Anyways, slavery is still widespread throughout the modern world. And most of these countries, they don't even have religions. They just got philosophies. Philosophies are bad for a country because they don't entitle the people to any rights. Here's A White Slave by Ernest Norman. There's slavery all over the world nowadays. Look at the untouchable system in India. That's not slavery. Okay, they got the Greeks and Romans out of the school. It's inappropriate to talk about the Greeks and Romans. It's inappropriate to talk about the Bible. You don't have the Greeks and Romans in school, what do you got? You got drag queen story hour. Now, do you think children are better off learning about the ancient Greeks and Romans and the founding fathers of the USA and the Bible in school? Or do you think they're better off with this drag queen story hour insanity. Okay, this is insane. Okay, young children should not be exposed to anything sexual. It's insane. It's insane. And they also now try to trick them. They have all these estrogenic chemicals in the food supply and in the water that, you know, confuse kids about their gender, and then they try to trick them into castrating themselves. This is happening on a widespread basis in the public schools. Could you imagine if you studied an ancient culture where they celebrated murdering their children, cannibalizing their children, and then castrating their children? You would say, these people are sick in the head. And then you go to the museum, there's all this fake stuff called modern art and statues of turds. You'd say, these people are sick. They are depraved. Okay? This is insanity. And people should talk about it. This is not normal. This is crazy. Okay, and all this stuff, you know, Buddha, Confucius, those are not religions. Those are not gods. Those are philosophies. Okay, the untouchables, that a whole bunch of people are born just to be toilet cleaners, okay? That's ridiculous. This idea of throwing the widows on the fire, okay? That's a rather brutal thing to do, don't you think? All right. Now here's a guy from India named Vishal Mangawati. He wrote a fantastic book called The Book That Made Our World. And what he talked about basically is the best part of India is the part that converted to Christianity because of the Christian missionaries. So he didn't like the English companies that came over there to exploit the people of India, but the Christian missionaries really helped them. He says, the Bible is the only known force in history that has freed entire nations from corruption while simultaneously giving them freedom. The Bible created the modern world of science and learning because it gave us the Creator's vision of what reality is all about. This is what made the modern West a reading and thinking civilization. Postmodern people see little point in reading books that do not contribute directly to their career or pleasure. This is a logical outcome of atheism, which has now realized that the human mind cannot possibly know what is true and what is right. So he basically says almost everything good you see in civilization, it all came from Christianity, and that's true. And this is a guy from India, okay? He's familiar with all the Hinduism, all the Buddhism, all that stuff, okay? And he just noticed one good thing after another happened with Christianity in India and in other places. Here's the creation of Adam, the painting by Michelangelo from the Sistine Chapel, and basically the gist of it is man is created in the image of God, therefore he's like God in a sense. He's part divine as well as part beast, but being created in the image of God and part divine, he's entitled to natural rights. You should respect him. He should have free speech. He should have the right to privacy. He should have the right to property. Just one more painting, you know, Adoration of the Child by Honhorst. It's that, you know, Christianity is all about celebrating the family and celebrating life. Okay, and here's Christian architecture. It's magnificent. Christian art, it's magnificent. We were building things like this back in 1200 AD. Modern buildings, as Tom Wolfe had said, they look like animal cages, and they always put a statue of the turtle from them. That's a disgrace. That's an insult. Why do people put up with it? Because they're so lazy and stupid. And then here's real art by Edmund Layton, you know, Godspeed. And then here's like this fake. Picasso's a piece of crap. He's not a good artist. He's a member of the Communist Party who makes this fake crap. If you read about his life, you'll hate his guts. He was such an evil scumbag. But this gets, we pretend that this is real art. This is nonsense. This is something, you know, a high school kid in their, you know, second month of art class could do. This is real art, okay? I mean, it's rather obvious, don't you think? And Christianity celebrated whatever it could learn from other cultures, like learning from the Greek philosophers, Greek scientists, Greek engineers, and then with the Roman architecture in the background, the painting of Raphael, the School of Athens, and the Stanza Signatura, the signature room of the Vatican, showing that the Vatican had accepted what it had learned from the ancient Greeks and Romans are like tributaries, that syncretism, meaning that it can take things up. And Catholicism coexisted with paganism for over 500 years, like from 30 AD to 530 AD. So it didn't just replace paganism, it sort of adopted it. It learned from it about having good community and holidays and fun. And that's why Catholicism is so much more fun than Protestantism. Protestantism's all like, do as we say or you'll burn in hell. It's like, oh yeah, screw you, pal. All right, so here's just a typical magnificent painting of the landscape artist. And there's tons of them, like the whole Hudson River Valley School. This one's by Albert Bierstadt, Among the Sierra Nevada Mountains. Now, how beautiful is that? I mean, you can hit the print screen button. Isn't that magnificent? It's awesome. And again, you honor God by honoring and studying his creation. And that makes you happy to do that. Okay, we don't have time to get into everything, but this is Charlemagne being crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD, and then he got Alcuin in to make this advanced school system to get all the clergy literate as well as other people. How the West Was Won, Rodney Stark's a good book about how the West just developed almost everything that we consider modern came from the Catholic Church. Don't take my word for it, study it. So that's why people who say, oh, is church and science compatible? And I would say you can't have real science without Christian ethics. Otherwise, everything just becomes fake based on money, and that's where we're at right now with a lot of corporate-owned science. The church ran everything in astronomy. Galileo made fun of the Pope, and they overreacted, but there was a reason for it. Whereas modernism, they just defund and discredit and get fired any scientist who contradicts the corporate mantra. Here's Kepler. I'm just following God's thoughts after him. You know. Okay, and then here's some of the founding fathers. They were totally religious. The USA was founded as a Christian nation. They're praying in the same rooms in which they would legislate. They all went to Mass. You know, by modern standards, Thomas Jefferson was a Bible fanatic. These guys all knew the Bible backwards and forwards, could quote you, chapter and verse from any section of the Bible. The pastors back in those days didn't have the 503 exemption rules to mentally castrate them, and they were very opinionated and very involved in all this stuff. So anyways, I think that might be my last slide. Yeah, so it's a decent book, How Christianity Changed the World, and there's actually a lot more detail in it. I, of course, don't have time to go through all of it, but I read a whole bunch of books along these lines, and they all say the same thing, basically. Civilization is really like saying Catholic invented civilization. Just a fact. Study it for yourself. And then, the Protestants did do a lot of good stuff, too, later on. Isaac Newton, and then the whole Royal Society of England, etc. Anyways, and then later Scotland in the 1700s. I hope you found that helpful.